Good evening. If you could all take your seats. So we're going to get started. I think more people will come in as we go. I'm Madhu Khanna. I'm the Associate Director for Education and Outreach at the Institute for Sustainability, Energy, and Environment. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the third iSEE Congress that we have organized this year. The focus this year is on energy, sustainable paths to the future, and we have a diverse set of speakers, multiple disciplines represented here, and multiple perspectives on how we can decarbonize our energy consumption in the next couple of decades. And so it's a great pleasure to have you all join us for this event this evening. We have a packed 2 days of talks, and I hope it'll be a productive conference for everybody. We're going to get started with a keynote talk for today by Steve Koonin, and I'm going to ask Dr. Evan DeLucia, who's the director of the Institute, to come in and introduce Steve. After the talk today, please don't leave right away. We have a reception planned, so stick around and get to meet all of the speakers. So with that, I'm going to ask Evan to introduce the keynote speaker.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Evan DeLucia, the director of the Institute for Sustainability, Energy, or Environment, iSEE for short. This is the third year in a row the Institute has gathered leading national and international scholars to tackle a big issue. This year, we're going to be focusing primarily on energy, but usually the issues range from energy, sustainability, and the environment. We've had conferences on sustainable agriculture and water. This year, energy. I never really use visuals in these introductions, but I want to share with you two figures that I find deeply provocative and disturbing at the same time, and I think they illustrate cause and effect. So this one was created by Bruce Dale at Michigan State University, and it's the graph of human happiness as a function of per capita power consumption. So this was an assemblage of metrics to create a human development index on the y-axis, and it's plotted as a function of our energy consumption, and you can see that energy use equals happiness. So we're not getting away from it, particularly at low levels of energy consumption. There's a very, very deep slope there. And you can see at the top, Iceland can cut its energy consumption quite dramatically. Of course, it's Iceland, but Iceland can cut its energy consumption quite dramatically with no net loss in per capita, no reduction in per capita energy consumption. Unfortunately, these energy needs to support the human endeavor are almost entirely met by the use of fossil fuels. And that leads to the second iconic graph, which everybody in this room is deeply familiar with and very disturbing. And this is the unprecedented in Earth's history rate of increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this is one of many sort of human fingerprints on Earth's system. And of course, this is driving a rapid warming of our climate system, and that rapid warming and changes in the climate system are feeding back in somewhat unpredictable but unpleasant ways on that human well-being graph. So we've created an unfortunate feedback loop. And so in the face of human-caused climate change, questions about the sustainability of our current mix of energy resources, the knowledge that even more energy is going to be required, and that the world population is continuing to grow, putting more demands on those energy resources, really demands that we think about sustainable and equitable energy sources for the future. Hence the title of our Congress this year, 2016 Congress, Energy 2030, Path to a Sustainable Future. The Congress is really intended to stimulate conversation, to get people thinking about short and midterm solutions, but it's also intended to get new collaborations built scientifically with the policy arena, with the economics community, for us to start thinking about the kinds of actionable research we can put in play that will help solve the problem and advise policymakers going forward. As is our tradition with the iSEE Congress, we like to start with a provocative speaker who will give us a 30,000-foot view of the issue. And I think we have just such a person to launch us today, Dr. Steve Koonin. Dr. Koonin is founding director of New York University's Center for Urban Science and Progress, which uses big data to better understand how cities work and to find ways, using New York City as a laboratory, to make them more efficient, resilient, and sustainable. Dr. Koonin previously served as U.S. Department of Energy's Senate-confirmed Undersecretary for Science from 2009 to 2011. In that role, Dr. Koonin functioned as the department's chief scientific officer, coordinating and overseeing the breadth of research in DOE. He particularly championed research programs in high-performance simulation, exascale computing, internal fusion energy, and greenhouse gas monitoring, reporting, and verification. He also provided technical counsel on diverse nuclear security matters. Before that, and when I first got the opportunity to meet Dr. Koonin, he was chief scientist for BP from 2004 to 2009. While there, he developed long-range technology strategy for alternative and renewable energy sources and managed the firm's university-based research program. He also played a central role in establishing the Energy Biosciences Institute, of which the University of Illinois was a partner institution. Tonight, he's here to pose the question, can we ever get to a zero emissions world? And he'll help us understand what must be done if we don't. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Steve Koonin.
Now we've got to get the right slide deck up. So it's been, I think, about 8 years since I was here talking about energy and environment. And in those 8 years, a good bit has changed in the external landscape, and my own understanding has deepened somewhat. And I see this talk as something of an update of that. And as Evan said, I think I'll be a bit provocative. So one of the things I've come to understand is this energy-climate intersection is really a complex and nuanced subject. There are no silver bullets here, and you have to understand a lot about technology, economics, behavior, as well as the underlying climate science. The science of natural systems, of course, is a foundation for this. We want to know, how has the climate changed in the past? Why is it changing? What role do human influences play? And yes, it does change absent human influences as well. And how is it going to change in the future? The impacts of those changes on ecosystems and on the environment. Some of those impacts are going to be positive as well as negative. We often hear only about the negative impacts. You need to do a careful accounting of the pluses and minuses. What we'd like out of the scientific enterprise is an understanding of what's going on, confident projections using models over decades. The challenges here for the science are substantial. We've got incomplete observations. We're looking for small changes in a complex and chaotic system. And we need to take the certainties that we have about the climate science and the uncertainties and fold them into a discussion of what might society do in response to those changes and impacts. There are a set of possible responses. We can adapt. We can try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is a dominant theme here at this meeting, either by reducing demand or reducing emissions in the production of energy. And as I mentioned, this is a complicated mix of technology, economics, politics, behavior, and perceptions. And then finally, what was a dirty word and has become a permissible and polite company, geoengineering, is a third option. And this is the range of things that we have as a result to deal with the changes in the climate system. As one starts to think about those options, we need to worry about their efficacy, Can they scale? What are they going to cost? What are the collateral benefits, unintended consequences, and public acceptability? And thinking through all of that and deciding what to do, we need a healthy admixture of values. Not everybody approaches this subject with the same value set. How do we value the environment versus development? In the US, you might get one set of answers. If you go to India, you might get a different set of answers. Africa, yet a third. Intergenerational, international equities, and tolerance for risk. These last values things are things that people can legitimately disagree on, and so might condition the kind of actions that they favor or not in response to a changing climate. I'm going to concentrate in this talk on those things in red, namely options for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and considerations of the various dimensions of those different options. Let me start by just reminding you of the one basic fact about the climate change problem that I think is the most execrable and difficult circumstance in the problem, and that is that CO2 remains in the atmosphere for centuries. This is a somewhat old slide, so the numbers are slightly different now, but the point is the same. We are filling up the atmosphere. It drains very gradually. And as a consequence of that, it is not the emissions themselves that matter for perturbations of the climate system, but it is the cumulative emissions that we're fighting to stabilize. Take the emissions themselves to zero and stabilize the cumulative emissions. And this is a graph of the cumulative emissions through 2011. And you can see it's going up like gangbusters. The atmosphere is filling up, and a consequence of that is the Keeling Curve that Evan showed you. This lifetime is really highly problematic. And again, this is an old chart, but I think it is so fundamental to this business. If emissions are going up like that, the concentration, the thing that really drives the climate, is going up like that. If we manage to make a small change, modest change in emissions, the concentration is going to do that. Namely, it will still go up, but it will be delayed somewhat. And if we believe that the threshold above which we should not go is, let's say in this case, 600 parts per million, you can see that by reducing emissions modestly, we've only delayed, but we haven't prevented the climate system from being impacted. And so you really have to bend things over hard if you're going to stabilize human emissions. This is a graph from one of the IPCC reports of a few years ago. In the upper left panel over here, you see the concentrations under various scenarios of technology and economic development, the green being the lowest concentration at 2100 and the blue being the highest. So this is CO2, this is methane, and you can do that for all of the greenhouse gases. You can turn the concentrations into human influences, and for the 4 different scenarios, it's shown over here, measured in radiative forcing, watts per square meter. You can see the green one, by construction, pretty much flattens out and stabilizes human influences, and all of the others keep rising. If you look at what the composition of those human influences are to 2100, for all of those scenarios, it's essentially CO2, and that's the one we've got to worry about. Methane is a relatively small actor in this, and it disappears pretty quickly from the atmosphere anyway. So here are the 4 different trajectories out to, in this case, 2300, the radiative forcing, the human influence, and this is what the emissions have to do in order to produce those forcing trajectories. The green one, which many people allege would be a safe one and not take us above 2 degrees centigrade, requires that emissions have to go to 0 by 2075, just to stabilize human influence, not reduce them. 0. Right. 0 means no oil, no coal, no gas, absent sequestration or biological offsets. And I think the real question that we should be thinking about, part of the subject of this Congress, what are the socio-technical pathways and barriers to getting to 0 by 2075? That's why it's phrased as, can we ever get to a zero emissions world in the title? Because that's what you have to do if you want to stabilize human influences. Before I start into the meat of that discussion, it's good to see how much got done at COP21 in Paris, which was, when was it, a year ago, roughly? No, more, 2014, and December 2014, right? 2015, okay, 15. And was just ratified, whatever that means for the US, by President Obama and the Chinese a couple days ago. In that treaty, or excuse me, agreement, we're not supposed to call it a treaty because treaties need to be ratified by the Senate in this country. In that agreement, each individual country made a commitment to reduce its emissions by a certain amount by 2030. And our good friends at the IPCC produced this graph, which shows the historical trajectory of emissions, the business as usual, which is the various orange bars there, and then if all of the INDCs are fulfilled. And you can see that it is a modest, a very modest reduction on emissions by 2030. If you ask, well, post-2030, what do you need to do in order to still stabilize human influences, is this various set of blue trajectories, and you see that they go down even more steeply as the turnover gets delayed. Okay? And I also remind you that this Paris Agreement has 5-year reviews for the self-reporting. It is non-binding, and it has no enforcement mechanism. So we are essentially relying on the goodwill of the 190 some odd countries that have signed up for this to make these major shifts in their society in order to stabilize human emissions. All right, so let's have a look at the 30,000-foot view of global context out to the middle of the century. What kind of world are we trying to affect change in? Demographic first. Population's going from 7.3 to about 9.7. Most of that growth is in the developing world. The developed world, the billion people that live in the US and Europe and developed Asia, are getting older, and the developing world has got a tremendous number of young people. The other demographic factor is that people are moving to cities. That's one of the reasons I've been studying cities for the last 4 years. We're urbanizing at the rate of 50 million people a year. So that is 6 New York cities a year, roughly. And we'll go from 50% urban currently to 70% urban globally. So if you want to reduce energy consumption, cities are the place to really look. Economic, we are going to see the development of most of the world. Again, 6 billion people currently are moving up the economic ladder. We're going to see a growing demand for energy resources, about a 50 or 60% increase by mid-century. And we are going to see, I believe, a leveling of the economic playing field. The US is about 4.5% of the world's population, but it's about 18% of its GDP. And so we are out of whack by about a factor of 4 in GDP per capita relative to the rest of the world. And there's one thing I know about physics, it's the second law of thermodynamics, which says that things tend to equalize. And we are gradually seeing either the US coming down or the rest of the world coming up, and that's getting played out almost daily in the political discussion. It's inevitable, I believe. This is a slightly different version of the chart that Evan showed you. Here I equate money with happiness. I guess that's, I don't know. It's a philosophical discussion. Anyway, GDP per capita, energy use per capita, and you see that the rich countries use a lot, but pretty constant in their trajectories. The developing countries have, as he mentioned, this more or less universal slope of energy use as GDP grows. And as far as I know, nobody has figured out what determines that slope. And I think that's essential if we're going to learn how to reduce energy use in the developing world, which is the bulk of the growth in energy use over the next several decades. Is it the energy required to produce steel or concrete? I'm not sure what it is, but it's pretty universal. And it's so many gigajoules per dollar of GDP. Another context. Energy. Fossil fuels, as was mentioned, are the most common, most reliable, and cheapest form of energy right now, and they're not going to run out for a very long time. This is a BP chart from a couple years ago. Energy use globally by fuel, oil, gas, coal. Of course, you might argue that they have a self-interest in this kind of projection, but the historical data are what they are, and it doesn't take too much imagination to see that this is probably, in broad terms, the way the world is going to go. Got to worry about oil running out? Nonsense. Okay. This shows world oil reserves as a function of the cost of production. And we have used, since the beginning of oil, about 1 trillion barrels. And you can see that the reserves extend out to 9 trillion barrels or so, various processes. Let's just, without processes, out to there, 7 trillion barrels at costs of $60 to $80 a barrel. So at prices we have experienced already, each trillion barrels is about 30 years at current use rates. So we've got 120, 150 years worth of oil at least. New technologies come along all the time. Fracking in the US has increased domestic oil production dramatically in ways that we never dreamed of back in 2010. So not going to run out. Environmental issues are growing environmental impacts. When we were setting up the EBI, David Silverman made a remark which has stuck with me. The only humans who don't pollute are dead ones, and even that's not so obvious. People have environmental impacts, and of course there is a push to reduce greenhouse gas emissions concentrations. And we're seeing technology move, which gives us some sense that maybe we can help here a bit with technology. The hot subjects, in my point of view, are informatics, robotics for autonomy and autonomous control of various equipment, materials and manufacturing, and biology, all the technology areas that are moving most rapidly, and one should look for new solutions to some of these energy problems. And then I think we're going to see, again, greater regulation, greater flow of people, goods, and ideas, and capital around the world. This is part of the leveling of the playing field. This shows emissions per person against GDP per person. Again, somewhat old, so the red and green bars are not quite where they should be, but never mind. Today's global average is actually up at about 6 tons per person, and required for stabilization is still way down. And so the whole globe, if we're going to stabilize, has got to get down to the level of India, basically, in per capita emissions. The US is doing a little bit better than one might think. This chart ends at 2005. The 2014 number is about 18 tons per person. So we've come down a little bit from where we are, but 0 by 2075, I'll leave it to you to decide. I think it's important to remember, and I'm pleased to learn that you focused on sustainable agriculture in one of the recent editions of this Congress. Agriculture, land use change, big contributors. You don't hear much discussion about that. Agriculture is as much as transportation. There's a lot of discussion of transportation, not so much about agriculture. All right. Okay, so let's talk about projections a little bit. Projections going forward, it's perilous. You have to try to strike a balance between being so general as to say nothing and so detailed as to be certainly wrong. And it's a tough business. But I think there are some general principles. First of all, you can say a zero emissions world doesn't violate physical laws. We can imagine a physical system that would do that, but it likely violates both economic and political laws. As we think about low emission technologies, the cost and scale and carbon constraint are the most important, but they're not the only things that matter. If you're talking about electricity generation, you have a very low tolerance for electricity outages, and so reliability is important. I think another thing you can say, the energy system is going to change slowly. It's got big facilities, large capital investments, long lifetimes, interoperability, many features that means it takes decades to change at its natural pace. And then finally, energy is a local discussion. It depends on what resources you might have. the existing infrastructure, the climate, the mix of activities. And I like to say what would work in New York City is not going to work in Niger. Right? So it really is a very local discussion. A couple of charts just to illustrate the points. U.S. energy supply for the last 160 years, changing slowly, taking decades to go from wood to coal to oil to gas and so on. In absolute terms, it's kind of amusing. Tremendous growth in energy use in the 20th century as the country became more prosperous. A couple of numbers about renewables, just to give you a sense of where they are. The wind capacity today or last year was 69 gigawatts. In 1999, about 17 years ago, it was only 2.5 gigawatts. So the wind has gone up substantially in capacity. Somewhat surprisingly, wind generation in 2014 was about 5% of total electricity generation in the country. Not bad, but still got to go to zero. Solar capacity in 2014 was 22.7 gigawatts, but it accounted only for 0.6% of our electricity generation, for those of you who are fans of solar. As we think about trying to chunk the big problem into manageable problems, I'll give you a couple of factoids about New York City energy consumption in the buckets that we will try to treat for the country or the world as a whole. New York City energy consumption is measured in petajoules, and U.S. total is about 10 to the 5th petajoules per year. So transport in New York City annually uses 158 petajoules. LDVs, light-duty vehicles, automobiles, and light trucks in the form of gasoline and ethanol, 125. Heavy-duty vehicles, 23, most of that diesel, a little bit of CNG. Subway and rail commute, about 9.9. So transport's 158. Stationary electricity, New York City runs at about 6.5 gigawatts on average. Big peaks during the day and with the seasons, but average is 6.5 gigawatts. 181 petajoules, oh, I said it, 5.8 gigawatts peak. The street and traffic lights, just for amusement, use 0.8 of that petajoules. Could get a lot less if you put in high efficiency bulbs. And then heating, which was a surprise, at least for me, and when I showed these numbers to others. The heating of buildings, space, for water, for industry, whether in the form of oil, gas, steam, 304 petajoules. And as I think about decarbonizing, let's say, New York City, I think I can manage the transport and the electricity. I don't see how to decarbonize the heat. Right? So we'll come back to that in a little bit. All right, so decarbonizing strategy, cost-effective efficiency, good for all seasons, and becomes more effective as the technology improves. But even when the technology is there, capital funds versus operating funds to put in efficiency heavy equipment are often not there. There are principal-agent disconnects and rebound, all of which work to lessen the impact of efficiency. Then we've got to think about decarbonizing transport for both heavy and light duty. We have to decarbonize electricity for both base load and peak, and we've got to decarbonize heat. And I want to go through each of these categories and give you a sense of where I think the technology plays are. Vehicle efficiency is a vastly underexploited lever through mass reduction. We're going to see autonomy. I've been hearing a lot more about that. I was with the Ford and Toyota autonomy guys a couple of weeks ago. This is going to happen probably, I would say, on a 10-year time scale. It won't happen all at once. We're going to see a progression of assisted driving, but it's going to happen, and of course, connectivity. The fuel choices, electricity, cellulosic biofuels, hydrogen are what you've got if you want to go to zero emissions. So CNG is not there. You got to be zero. Okay? I think the LDVs are going to go electric. We're seeing that already. We're going to see a transition to hybrids and plug-in hybrids and then battery vehicles. We're not doing so well, though. The 240 million LDVs in this country, about 14 million are sold per year. 120,000 plug-in vehicles were sold in 2014. 120,000 out of 14 million. That's a good. The batteries are marginally good enough now, so I think we're going to start to see more of this, and the charging infrastructure is partially in place. Certainly everybody's got a garage where they can plug things in, at least in this part of the country. You can add up how much electricity you need to power LDVs, and the answer is not much. In New York City, we need 16% more generation than we've got currently going into the city, but that assumes that you could time it and phase it appropriately, not to generate excessive load. Some charts illustrating the leverage of mass in cars. You can make the cars 30% more efficient at a cost of another $2,000 per vehicle. So this is an issue of economics and behavior again. If you want to power vehicles with various technologies, whether it's compressed natural gas or electricity, you can see that how much more of the existing production do you need to get 50% of the LDVs. For compressed natural gas, it's about 40% more gas. For electricity, as I said, it's about a 15 to 20% hit. Fuel cells, you need to make a lot of hydrogen, much more than we do right now, 3 times as much to power vehicles. And for biofuels, we'd probably need 6 times as much to run half the fleet on biofuels. It gives you a sense of the kind of perturbation. This is why I like electricity, because it's not much of a perturbation on the supply infrastructure. The other thing you get when you go to electricity is the price of fuel stabilizes and reduces. This graph shows normalized prices for electricity, which is the orange line on the bottom, and for various liquid fuels or other fossil fuels. And you can see those show big swings. But electricity prices are nice and relatively predictable and stable. So that's a benefit to the consumer if you went to electricity. The heavy-duty vehicles are a different problem. You could go biodiesel, electricity, or hydrogen. And there I think the jury is out. However, the fleet nature of the heavy-duty vehicles makes the fueling infrastructure much less of an issue. And so I think we're going to see experimentation there. Again, no CNG. You got to go to zero. Well, let me skip that one. Suppose we were to do this nationally. What are some of the consequences? Well, we're going to see lower oil demand, and that's going to create lower prices, making oil cheaper and extending the decarbonization transition. So we better think about that. The vehicle costs are going to be higher, but the fuel costs will be lower. So that changes the economics of buying and operating a vehicle. As I said, the fuel costs will become more stable. Is there going to be enough biomass for biodiesel globally? Global transport is surging as more goods are produced and moved around. And then for the oil companies, the oil reserve assets become essentially worthless at some point. These are major economic dislocations that would happen if we went this way over the next couple decades. All right, let's talk about electricity a little bit. It's the next one. It's much more than the cost of electricity and emissions. Intermittency, dispatchability, land use, water use, the local environment. Remember, there's no easy way to store electricity, and so power demand is highly variable. That graph shows over a week the power demand in the PJM, the Mid-Atlantic region. And you can see during the summertime, the demand oscillates daily by almost a factor of 2. And that means you've got to be bringing plants on and off with good precision so that you match generation with the load. You can't store this stuff, and so you have to be able to generate it on demand. The other thing about not being able to store electricity is we have to overbuild the infrastructure. This shows the demand curve for New York City, the number of hours per year for a given demand. And you can see that the peak demands, which are up there at about 13 gigawatts, remember I told you the average was about 6, happen for only a couple hundred hours a year. And so you've got to build the whole system to handle this peak demand, but you'll use it only for a couple hundred hours a year, just because we can't store electricity. You can go through, discussions of how much the baseload power systems cost. CCS, unproven economically or even technically, in my view. Nuclear is about the only one that works today if you want to be emissions-free. There are cost problems with that, and there are acceptance problems with that in some parts of the world. How much generation do we add? What's the natural turnover of the system? And the answer is, historically, we typically add about 15 to 20 gigawatts of capacity a year. The mix depends upon tax credits, regulations, and the economics of running a business. It varies from years in which we do a lot of oil and gas to wind or solar and so on. But even if you say I'll give you 20 gigawatts a year, the whole US system is a little more than a terawatt. And so that is something like a 50-year turnover, if I do the math right. And that's just capacity. It's not electricity. The newer renewables have much less capacity than capacity factor than do the gas plants, for example, or nuclear. All right, methane. A lot of people say bridge to a low-carbon future, right? Methane. Probably not. First of all, if it's a bridge, it's got to be a bridge to zero. But it is likely climate neutral. Let me show you in the US, the gas is changing the energy system. This is historical and projected gas production in the US. Shale gas is happening. It will keep the price of gas low for the foreseeable future. This is the history of gas prices over the last 20 years, roughly, and you can see it's pretty cheap right now. On 9/6/16, it was $2.88 per million BTUs at Henry Hub. If the gas is less than $8, and it is well less than $8, fission is an economic loser. You would not build a nuclear power plant if you knew gas was less than $8. Gas less than $3 beats renewables without backup costs. And so if you go purely by economics, wind and solar are not economical currently given gas prices. Gas has done good things in the US. It's brought back manufacturing, and it's converted gas imports to impending gas exports. And we're seeing bankruptcies in coal, gas to coal, actually the other way around, coal to gas. It's become pretty common, and we're also seeing bankruptcies in renewables. I sometimes advise people who are looking to do venture investing, and they're finding it very difficult to find renewable energy opportunities for their money. And then finally, there are some interesting studies that said, let's turn the whole world into gas. If you did that, you'd get lower carbon dioxide for sure, by about a factor of 2, but the methane leaks. And those methane leaks, together with the loss of aerosol cooling, result in essentially no reduction in radiative forcing for the climate. So no climate impact or greatly muted climate benefit if you went all to gas, unless you figured out how to stop the leaks. All right, baseload, nuclear, we've talked about. There are a number of considerations. I don't think I want to go into them right now. Biomass, we can do carbon capture and storage, net negative emissions, but economics, and if you use the biomass for power, you can't use it for fuel. Renewables, in the US at least, hydro is essentially tapped out nationally. No more good sites for that. Solar and wind have limited potential. We're not there yet by any means. I would put it at 20 to 30% of generation. Depends on weather statistics, land use, environmental impacts, storage or backup, and transmission, and stability of the grid. I know some people will talk about that later on in this Congress. Storage is really important and is something to be working on. Solar and wind electricity is currently more costly. I found this graph interesting. It shows for various countries around the world, mostly Europe, the price of residential electricity plotted against the installed solar and wind capacity per capita. And what you see is that the high-price electricity countries have the greatest renewable fraction. We can argue whether that's chicken or egg, right? If the price is high, renewables become more economic, Or if you have more renewables, it pushes the price up. Anyway, it is a demonstrable correlation, demonstrating that renewables cost more. I put the US on this graph, assuming some nominal exchange rate, and you see that we've got a little bit more than Czechoslovakia and Romania, but the electricity is about as cheap. Transmission lines we need for wind and solar, a lot of them, because the wind and the solar are not where the people are. And then finally, solar takes land. I like to show this to New York City audiences. This is the Long Island Solar Farm near Brookhaven National Laboratory. It's 200 acres and does 5 megawatt average, 37 megawatt peak. There's a picture of it. Right? So this is presumably reasonably modern solar technology. I did the exercise of taking the Indian Point nuclear power plant, which is 2 reactor cores, 2 gigawatts, and asking how much land do I need to replace that? And the answer is it's the size of that circle, which is a 5.5 mile radius circle. It's a lot of land. And if you want to do New York City baseload, you need 3 of these. Okay. This part of the country, it's not so much of an issue. In the crowded places where most of the people live, it's a big issue. All right, finally, heat. Carbon-free, you might argue for cities generate carbon-free electricity outside and just pipe it in and turn it into heat with resistive heating. Very inefficient. If you did that in New York City, electricity demand would go up 1.5 times. Heat pumps will work in some places, but if the climate's too cold or in urban areas, they don't work. I don't know where to put the reservoir for the heat pump in Manhattan because the underground is full of pipes and subways and everything else. District heating would work. Biomass, small modular reactors. When I first came to New York City, a New York City official said, I want this borough to be the leader in clean energy. And I said, fine, how about we put a small modular reactor in the borough where he was president. He didn't like that at all. But again, you want to go to zero, this is the kind of thing you need to do. Industrial, I don't know how to solve the industrial heat problem in a carbon-free way. It's worth thinking about. Let me skip that. I'll skip that. Rest of the world. I've been focusing on the US. The rest of the world, booming energy consumption. There's China. Everybody says China is getting off of coal. That's Chinese energy consumption. That big pink swath in the middle is coal. Yes, they're doing other things, wind, nuclear, but most of it is fossil fuels right now. The UN has recognized that energy is essential for development. The UN Foundation says about 1.2 billion people have no access to electricity. 1 billion more have access only to unreliable electricity, and 3 billion people rely on traditional biomass for cooking and heating. We can ask, if you have to choose, and I think at some level you're going to have to choose between providing energy to these people and going to zero emissions, it's a values judgment about what you're going to do. All right, I want to break the presentation for a second and take an informal poll. This is the Keeling Curve that Evan showed you during the introduction. In August last month, the CO2 concentration was 402.25 ppm. Okay? And so I'd just like to get quick shows of hands for the following set of questions. Do you agree with the fact that CO2 levels are going to go above 450 during this century? How many people would agree with that? Yeah, pretty much everybody, all right? We're going to go above 550 in this century. Yeah, about half, maybe 2/3. 650? Anybody think we're going to stabilize concentrations? Okay. Nobody thinks we'll go above 650? Oh, okay, 1, 2. Okay, I'm with you guys, by the way. And 750, I assume nobody believes we'll go that high. Okay. All right, it's interesting to see what people think. Again, not what you think should happen, but what you think will happen. There's a difference. All right, so what's my take on all of this? My strategy first. I think part of the problem, at least in this country and some other countries like the UK and Australia, is that we have muddled up the science and the policy discussion. And we need to get that clear to get everybody on the same page, whatever that might be. First thing we got to do is keep watching the climate with ever better coverage and ever better precision. We must keep doing that. Without that data, we're not going to understand what's going on. The second is I think there needs to be a really clear discussion of uncertainties in our understanding of the climate system, because this feeds into the values discussion. Your appetite for risk, for example. In all other nationally important problems, at least in this country, we have red team exercises, where a team of experts is tasked with finding out what's wrong with this picture. You also do it for major engineering projects. We have not had that exercise yet. That's not what the IPCC does. Using that, we need to reframe the discussion. It's not about certainty. A politician stands up and says the science is settled. That's just wrong. It is not productive. What the politician should be saying is, yes, there are uncertainties, but given my values, given what I think society's values are, this is what we need to do. And we need to have the discussion in that context. Here's some discussion of the settled science. One chart, which I saw recently that I thought pretty impactful. In the climate science business, there are what are called the climate sensitivities. The equilibrium climate sensitivity, ECS, and the transient climate sensitivity, TCR, transient climate response. And they're basically, if you doubled the CO2, either instantaneously or over a 70-year period at 1% a year, how would the temperature go up in a model? And you can see that the estimates published back in the early part of the 2000s were significantly higher than the estimates that are people publishing now. So our understanding of the climate system, if it is improving, is suggesting that the system is not as sensitive as we thought it was to greenhouse gases back at the turn of the century. I think we should be pursuing the easy emissions reductions. Cost-effective efficiencies, absolutely. Push them in by regulation. There are side effects, local environment, energy security, to improving efficiency in various energy uses. And I think we should be pushing very hard RD&D, research, development, and demonstration, for low emissions technologies. My list is there. You know, Bill Gates and Buffett are putting a lot of money into this. The US government is putting a lot of money into these things. We need to push that hard to have them available at modest cost increases. I think we're going to reduce emissions further if and when the science becomes more certain. A lot of trouble we've got right now is the fact the science is not nailed down. A values consensus would also do it, or the zero emissions technologies become more feasible. And to give you a sense of what we're trying to understand and are up against, this is a poll, a Gallup poll that was taken in 2014, where they asked some large number of Americans which are the problems that are at the top of your list. Okay, and the availability and affordability of energy is over here, down at number 8 or something like that, 9, and climate change is down there. Okay, and my guess is if you took the poll today, it would be about the same, maybe even worse. I don't know, maybe somebody knows what the results are. So there is no value consensus at this point. You could say people don't understand. Maybe they do, maybe they just have different values. I think adaptation has got to be on the table. There are many factors that recommend adapting to a changing climate, even if it's not what you think might be optimal. It's effective. Humans managed to live from the equator up to the Arctic Circle. We somehow managed to muddle through, however the climate changes. It's agnostic. The climate may be changing naturally or may be changing due to human influences. It doesn't matter if you're doing adaptation. It's also proportional. The climate changes a little, you adapt a little. The climate changes a lot, you'll adapt a lot more. It's also local. Rather than reducing emissions in order to make the climate better halfway around the world in a generation or two, if you start building dams or other adaptation measures, it's locally palatable. You will see the effects locally and does not require a global consensus. It's also autonomous. It's what's going to happen anyway. It will happen. And in fact, is happening already. I think there's still a lot of work study to do. What are the modes of adaptation? How do you categorize it? How do you think about costs? Is there a wedges discussion for adaptation in the same way that there's a wedges discussion for mitigation? And then finally, what are we adapting to? Our ability to project climates at the local scale is not very good right now. And then I think we need to develop geoengineering as a last resort. I did not say deploy, but in the contingency that the climate starts to go bad really rapidly, you'd like to know whether you've got this as an option. What's the research program? Can we do feasibility tests? How do you govern the deployment of geoengineering? This is a nice cartoon that just shows the different ways of potentially influencing the climate in a deliberate way through reflecting more sunlight or modulating the carbon cycle biologically. All right. So my bottom line thoughts, I'll close with that, and then I'd love to have some discussion. I think it's unlikely that we're going to get to zero by, let's say, 2100. Remember, 2075 to stabilize human influences. And so they're going to continue to grow through this century. If you believe that human influences are already deteriorating the climate, and I'm not certain about that, we're in for at least another century of this. R&D is essential to prepare for a contingent future, and society is going to adapt kind of no matter what. It'd be good to know if we got geoengineering options on the shelf. Okay, with that, I'm happy to take comments or questions.
Yes, you mentioned only once, or maybe two was in the last slide, the word CCS.
CCS.
And if I was, it was a very small fund, if I was sitting 2 rows back, I couldn't see. It's the only way that you really have a negative carbon, right? Now, what's the value of, carbon capture CCS, carbon capture sequestration, to this idea of 2075 zero emission? I mean, is it worth to continue that thing, or it's expensive, right?
Of course, and we have other ways of generating emissions-free electricity.
So what is the fit?
Right now, it looks too expensive. I'd love to see R&D to try to drop the costs. I'd also like to see investigation of the integrity of the reservoirs to make sure that we don't leak.
Is that something that you think it comes to reality?
No. No, you know what the answer is no. If we want to do emissions-free electricity, we got to do nuclear. Okay? Proven technology.
But my understanding is that if this 2-degree scenario is going to be valid by 2010, you have to have like 10-15% negative carbon footprint by 2090 to reach that. So at some point, I guess
You may have to do that. Okay?
somebody have to have
Somebody will decide how much that's worth to the world, right? If you make the price on carbon high enough, it becomes economic. Right now, it's not. Dave?
Oh, fantastic talk. Seeing that most of us, seeing that most of the people in academia see that climate change is the biggest problem in the world. But if you look at the election in the US and England, and if you speak that historian, it's a small problem compared to what happened to humans, what happened to employment, what happened. So basically, we are in a situation that we really have to look at it within a society that has a system of classes. How basically the 85% of the large number of people that vote for Trump or whatever will buy into a world that climate change is a big issue. That to me, and I think that's the way to look at solution. But I think there are 2 points that I have. First, we will be able to adapt very well. Some countries don't really care. Chicago will be better off with climate change, to be honest. The key issue is what happens to developing countries.
Yes, of course.
That is the big challenge.
Of course.
Now, I want to tell you one thing. In California already, you have what I call microclimate adaptation. When you grow fruits, you spread stuff to keep the temperature down. So to me, the gap between developed and developing is much bigger.
Yeah.
So to me, the big issue is that there are 2 or 3 issues in climate change. The issue number 1 is how we treat this planet relative to other problems. And the big problem of the IPCC is the club of basically entities that alienate other people. It has to move to a system that is more democratic. A second system is how you really integrate, make the real social issues and really make sure that the poor people know that they will get school, so it's really better for them rather than for the rich. And the third thing is how you really basically convince a lot of people that think that they protect us against progress to be more positive about technology, because technology, our knowledge and our technology, there is a big gap and it's growing because of regulation.
We're very good at adapting if we have the technological freedom to do that. Just two sort of remarks. One is, if I say the two words beyond Lombok, is everybody going to throw tomatoes at me? You know, he's somebody who's tried to go through quantitatively and understand the costs and benefits of dealing with various problems. And my guess is that right now the biggest threat to the US over the next 10 to 20 years is a nuclear-armed Korea and possibly a nuclear-armed Iran. And those are the things that could really reach out to get us in a very unpleasant way.
In your very last slide, you added the remark that you weren't sure, or actually you have it written there, if human influences are deteriorating, you said you weren't sure about that.
Yeah.
I was surprised at that. Can you elaborate?
Sure. I mean, if you look at the long-term record of storms, if you look at the long-term record of droughts, you know, the temperature's going up, and we're breaking record temperatures. That's fine. But the other purported climate impacts just aren't there. Okay?
If you look at the long-term record of warm days, if you look at the long-term record of fewer cool days, Steve, you shouldn't cherry pick looking at particular records. I think that statement is pretty tough to justify.
Yeah. So I said the temperature is going up, but storms, sea level rise has been constant for the last 150 years at 2.7 millimeters a year from the tide gauges. All right? Okay? Constant.
Just to pick up on the point, you had emphasized, I think rightly, that you don't want to use certainty as a club. Now, even if one grants the point that you made in this exchange, do you discount what various projections and modeling say, such that you aren't going to be convinced until we either know or don't know?
So now we're into a values discussion, perhaps, right?
No, we're into a question about how we better characterize the nature of uncertainty.
Okay, so let's talk about the climate models. Okay?
No, let's not talk about
Oh, you mentioned it.
I wasn't talking about GCMs. I was talking about starting with a climate forcing scenario and trying to figure out what happens to sea level, what happens to storm surges.
Don't we need the GCMs to do that?
Conditional on a scenario which you can pull from a GCM, or you can pull from
Oh,
a
sure.
GCM.
But right now the climate sensitivity, according to IPCC, is uncertain by a factor of 3.
Right. So look at the low levels of sensitivity.
Right.
Would you still conclude that, you know,
I think at 1.5 degrees, the world will be able to get through that just fine.
Sure. I was actually thinking more about 3 or 4.
Well, you said look at the low levels. Okay? We don't know. Okay? The models, if you look at the models as a scientist, they ain't great.
But we will probably never know until we know that we either stepped off the cliff or not.
You think there's a
I will grant you that's a values
Yeah,
discussion. not
that's a values
science.
discussion. That's right. Yeah.
So a couple questions. Well, just one, just on adaptation. I think that just picking up on David's point that it's not only poor countries, there's issues around loss of species and disease propagation that I think we don't have a good handle on. And as we look at how poorly we've done in the U.S. in terms of coming up with money, say, look at Zika, I worry a bit about that. Now, on R&D, I have sort of a push and a pull question for you. So R&D is obviously critical. If we're going to get to a zero-carbon economy, we need new technologies. I think. I don't think that's value. I think that's a statement of fact. So on the push side, we have things like ARPA-E, and I'm curious what your view is on ARPA-E. It has a budget of roughly $250 million a year. It's not very much. If we increase that by order of magnitude, is that something we could do? And then on the pull side, what kind of price do we need to really get induced innovation, do you think?
I think if you had a predictable carbon price at 40 or CO2 price at $40 a ton, that would shift things. It's got to be predictable.
What does that unleash in your view? Why 40?
I think it starts to make nuclear good compared to gas. I think it starts to, it's not that much of a perturbation on gasoline prices. It's about 35 cents a gallon in gasoline. So the way to fix transport is through regulation, the CAFE standards, and that's what we're doing right now. But I think if you want to fix power, $40 a ton starts to get there.
So that doesn't really increase innovation. I don't want to get debate, but that doesn't give us new R&D. That just shifts us to existing technologies.
No, not necessarily. I mean, you know, if there is a driver in that direction, people will start investing in technologies that will let you meet that constraint more cheaply.
And ARPA-E?
Boy, you know, the whole venture capital thing in energy, I used to say, when I was in the Department of Energy, what really matters is not how much money some venture capitalist decides to invest in a scheme, but it's quads saved, barrels displaced, and tons mitigated. Okay, and I think by that measure, it's not great. Energy technologies in your garage, maybe on the efficiency side, yeah, but on the supply side, no.
So where do you see money is well invested in R&D? How do you see us doing that in a way that unleashes the new technologies?
Look, I think an applied biology program in carbon management would be really interesting. Biology's got great potential to deal with carbon, and we're getting really good at biology in various ways, so that's something I would put money into. We are doing materials. I can't say we're not doing it. Quite apart from ARPA-E, there's a big base program in DOE materials. But if I can be honest, the Office of Science doesn't really push them in a very applied way as much as they should be. Okay. On the other hand, you've got all this private money waiting to come in also. You've got Gates and Buffett, all the fun stuff. Basic research, you can find opportunities once you start to get to serious commercialization. It's very hard right now to find ways you can make money with renewables. Solar City's in trouble, right? Yeah.
Will you please elaborate your vision on the last statement you have there about the geoengineering options, also the slides after this one? Thank you.
So what happens if there is some sudden climate change? We hit one of these tipping points, right? And Greenland starts to melt or something, right? Do we stand by and just watch it happen? I'd like to, the president or Queen, if you're in the UK, comes to the scientists and say, what do we do? And the answer can't be you move all of London in a decade, right? So are there ways to intervene in the climate system that might, on short-time scales, mitigate some of the changes you might see? I don't think we see any of those changes right now that we're warranted. But if you're going to do something like that, it's a 20-year research program to know whether it's even feasible and what are the consequences, the downsides. And I think the Royal Society and more recently the National Academies did reports that basically say that. Do some exploratory work. You couldn't have said that 5 years ago. Yeah.
See, one of your approaches was that we need sort of stronger science to really make the case on climate change stronger, etc. If you look at AR5, even with the projections, these models are hugely variable. And And the only solution the community has come up with is modeling to comparisons, taking an average. And all we hear from the community about how we solve this problem is more models. And I guess you must have been challenged with this issue as Undersecretary. What is maybe a better route to getting to the goal that you put out?
Look, we know what a serious modeling effort in complicated systems is, all right? And we've been doing it for the last 25 years in the nuclear weapons program. Nuclear weapon is a very complicated system of matter and radiation. In the absence of underground testing, we have developed extraordinarily sophisticated models that are benchmarked and validated and intercompared in a very serious way. Partly that's done because it's not, if you'll excuse me, an academic community doing it, or it's the national lab community doing it. Climate modeling, we do not have the kind of focused program that would start to get at some of those deficiencies. For example, there is a standard method in computational science called uncertainty quantification, where you basically diddle the parameters of the initial conditions and you do 1,000 runs and you look to see what happens. The distribution of results. Those methods are only just in the last year or two starting to be applied to the climate models in the weapons labs. So I'm told. Okay? Livermore tells me that. There was another point to make. What does the IPCC do? CMIP 5, for example, the ensemble they use. It's essentially you all come ensemble. They'll take anybody's climate model. I talked to the IPCC scientists. I said, if I write a climate model, can I get in there? They said, not quite, but almost. All right? And to give equal weight to all of those models in the ensemble and to define the uncertainty seems to me to be not a very good choice. Scientifically, it may be okay politically. So I would like to see a focused climate modeling program. I think we could take the US resources and do that instead of running all these runs for the IPCC. But it'll never happen. Yeah?
What is your perspectives on the value side? Just a few comments.
On values?
Yeah.
You want my own?
Because we debate a lot about science and can you get to the uncertainty level that you seek?
What level of uncertainty do we need for me to say, go ahead, do it for war?
Or the uncertainties that you know will exist for a period of time, but you still have to make the call.
Well, I might have some influence in the US, and we might make a certain call in the US, but that ain't gonna make much difference. Where it really makes a difference is in India and China. And that's what I would ask them. How certain do you, people running those countries, think you need to be in order to do this? They have a real choice to make because they've got a billion people who need energy to develop. Right? Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment on your $40 per ton.
Yeah, please.
Each dollar, the minimum thermodynamic, the minimum cost of minimum thermodynamic energy to capture strictly from atmospheric source and compress it 90% is about $35. So I think it's very unlikely that you are going to get 40. I think it will.
That's basically to do air capture, or that's capture in a plant?
No, capture and compress. No transportation, no capture, no storage. Just a capture. Because you can, thermodynamically, you can capture that energy.
Yeah.
And in today's cost, it was $30.
So we're not going to do it?
That's minimum.
Okay, maybe it needs to be $70 a ton. I would say though, look, in the US political system, all right, whatever price you put, 40, 70, let's suppose it's $70 a ton, all right? The US is putting out 5 gigatons, okay? That's $350 billion in a tax sweep, right? Do you trust the Congress to deal with $350 billion in new taxes, new tax revenues? I mean, you got to return it to people, right? At least the poor people who are going to see energy costs go up.
Capture is not cheap.
Well, whatever, cost of capture is $70 a ton, generates $350 billion. It's not I told you, this is a difficult issue.
I think Steve has done a fantastic job of getting us thinking and launching and setting the stage for our meeting over the next couple of days. Please join me in thanking Dr.